know, it's hard to believe that it was 80 degrees just a few days ago, and here we're into yet another cold snap this winter. But that's Oklahoma, isn't it? And after all, we still had chores to be done this winter. Right now I'm working on our shrub roses. The shrub roses are quite a bit different than hybrid tea or some of the climbing roses and so forth that have very specific pruning habits. If you look through any book on pruning, what they'll say is prune a shrub rose to still look like a shrub. And what they mean in essence is to keep it trimmed back and thinned out so it doesn't just totally overgrow your site. Some people will plant shrub roses, as we have done in our wildscape garden here, as a hedge effect and for a screening effect. But eventually they become less and less floriferous as they grow and expand. And so what I'm doing today on this one is just tipping it back a little bit to control the height and the width of it. You always want to cut out above a node. And mostly I'm just thinning this out. I've been taking out some wood. Here we have a branch off to the side that is causing this to invade part of our perennial bed. So I'll take that one back altogether. And then if you have any water sprouts coming up or any that are coming up away from the location where you want the shrub to be, you certainly want to take those out as well. But basically we're just doing some light pruning on this, as I said, just to keep it opened up but also in shape. And there's a little more work to be done on this, but the one next to it is really the one that I want to show you over here. This is one that we're going to try a little experiment on. Once you have shrub roses in place for a while, sometimes they need rejuvenating. They'll get a lot of old wood in them, or maybe you've just moved into a house that's had roses that have maybe not had much care for a while. Well, as with a lot of landscape plants, you can do rejuvenation. And what we're going to do is prune this back to about 10 inches above the ground. And that may seem very severe, but I think what that's going to do for us is rejuvenate this plant, bring out a lot of strong new stems, and encourage a lot of nice flowers later on this spring and summer. Well, as you can see with shrub roses, you have two choices. You can either prune them lightly or do a major renovation and prune them back pretty hard like we've done with this one. The main thing to keep in mind is to stay ahead of them before they get too wild. Well, right now we want to head over to the formal landscape. We have a plant there to prune that some people sometimes aren't sure what to do with come spring. There are some shrubs in the landscape that are beautiful for a while, but then they totally get out of control. This is a Philadelphus or mock orange, and in a very large estate type landscape, it would be just fine to leave it for years and years to develop this large mounding habit. But we have fitted ours in front of our junipers. We have our forest pansy redbud here. We have a crepe myrtle behind it, and it's getting a little too crowded. But the trick with shrubs such as mock orange or forsythia or others is that you want to prune it so that it doesn't look like it's been pruned, because if you shear it back, it will end up with a very bushy, hedgy, unnatural appearance. These are supposed to have a flowing, mounding appearance. And so the trick is to take out old wood that has become less productive of flowers, and also you want to prune back some of the outer branches just lightly to wood that is 1 year old. Now in mock orange, the way you tell 1 year old wood that's going to bear leaves and flowers is by the color. It has a red appearance, sort of a crackled red appearance, and this is 1 year old growth that came up last summer. That's going to bear flowers for us this spring. Whereas further back in the shrub, we have wood that is 2, 3, maybe 4 years old that has a more tan appearance. And that's the wood that we're going to go for today. Prune away and try to leave a natural appearance, get flower production, but get the height and the width back a little bit. So we'll get started down at the bottom, taking out some of that old growth. Well, after about 30 minutes of time and 4 people working on this, it gives you an idea of how much time is involved in renewing a shrub like this, but keeping it looking natural. We took our time with it. We went in and selected out the oldest growth and cut that off. And it took a pruning saw to get it back down to the ground. Then we slowly cut that away and pulled it out so as not to damage the buds that remain on here. We did a slight amount of tipping on some of these very upright canes, but tried to leave the arching canes as much as possible to maintain the form of the mock orange. But I want you to notice that we now have space for our redbud tree to grow without a lot of crowding. The shrub still looks okay in its spot, but take a look at this brush pile we've ended up with. And this is what's involved in really doing a good job on shrubs, is taking your time, but realizing that you're going to take quite a bit of wood out, and that's an okay thing to help renew the shrub. Now, this type of pruning can be done on forsythia, spirea, viburnums, certain lilacs, and then on over here, we're going to look at a crepe myrtle that can be done the same way. But last of all, I want to show you a bonus that came out of all this work. The plant had sent out some root suckers, and so we have another mock orange plant that was just off to the side that had come up under all that brush that no one had even noticed. And so we dug that out, and we'll be able to transplant that over to another part of the studio garden. Let's take a look at this crepe myrtle, and I want to show you how on that you can shear it back for maximum color in the garden. With crepe myrtle, you have a lot of options on pruning. You can leave it fairly tall, like this Muskogee variety behind me, which is meant to be a fairly tall crepe myrtle in the first place. But even that one, it would help to tip back some of those seed capsules up above to help it to fruit on out this season. Now down south, they grow them into trunks that are very decorative, but in Oklahoma, so often we lose them all the way back to the ground every 7 years. So most people prune them back fairly hard and just treat them as a fairly large shrub. This variety is also Muskogee, and Steve came in here and cut it back about halfway to revitalize it, and it'll send out a lot of new shoots this year. And pruning like this is fairly straightforward. And I want to show you one over here that's a little bit smaller to give you an idea of how easy it is. It's not quite as selective a process as with Philadelphus. You're not having to go in and pick out old wood versus new wood or whatever. You just start chopping it back. This variety is Seminole, and it's going to be a smaller, more dainty crepe myrtle in the first place. And part of what we enjoy about the smaller crepe myrtles is having the flowers at eye level. But all of this can be cut back, and we're going to take this back to about 3 feet tall. And that may seem fairly severe, but what that will do for us is it will help keep this shrub fairly small for this corner location in our landscape. So I'm just going to go in here, and you still want to cut back just above a node on the branch and make sure that it'll look fairly even and come out nicely for you in the spring. Well, this is a pretty easy pruning job. We just came in and sheared it off straight across. But as we pruned, the pruners had a different sound when we cracked into those stems that had been killed back by the winter. And so, of course, we took those all the way back to the ground. With crepe myrtle, the jury is still out. Winter is not over yet, so we don't know how much damage we could end up having on this by the time winter is over. Right now, though, it looks like we have quite a few stems that are still green in the cambium and will be okay to flush on out and give us some color. But if your crepe myrtle dies all the way back to the ground, don't worry. It'll just start new growth in the spring and come back directly from there. Well, I have some broadleaf evergreens I want to show you that definitely have some signs of winter damage, and I want to give you some tips on how to take care of them. Well, I guess I'd have to say that the southern magnolia is just about the grandma of all broadleaf evergreens, and when it gets winter damage, it really stands out in the landscape. Look at this contrast. We have a leaf here that we've taken from the interior canopy of the tree. Compare it with those that were burned back by the cold of winter. And really, there's nothing we can do about this. There's no point in pruning your tree. Certainly you don't have to hire it to be sprayed for anything or feed it extra food. It's just going to have to overgrow that old burned foliage. One thing we are concerned about, and that time can't help us with, is the buds. We have some flower buds that seem to have been damaged by the cold. There's one right here that's brown. There's another one back here that's a nice green. And if you cut across this one, you can see that it's been damaged by the cold, and probably it will not yield a magnolia blossom for us. Now, some of the smaller plants around the landscape look okay but have a little bit of burn foliage, such as our Mahonia aquifolium or Oregon gray polly. It has a little bit of damage, as do our boxwoods and so forth. Then we have a broadleaf evergreen that looks like it's been killed almost all the way back to the ground, and that's our pineapple guava. And although it's not hardy this far north, we have planted it right next to our studio barn so it could absorb a little bit of heat off the building. I think it's going to make it through the winter, but we're going to have to do some severe pruning. Now back to the magnolia. There's a sister plant to the magnolia that often frustrates gardeners this time of year, and that's the saucer magnolia. It's a deciduous magnolia. Its leaves are going to be fine. They'll come out later this spring and be wonderful. But all that warmer weather we had a few days ago induced early bloom of some of the blossoms on there, and they've been killed back by the cold. However, not all the blossoms were opened at one time. So fortunately, we will have a little color on that later this spring, but we're going to have a little bit of damage. Now, the thing that we're really concerned about is over in the orchard. We want to take a look at our peach trees and determine if we're going to have any kind of a crop this year or not.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.